afternoon. I was asked to give a little talk about the book that has been written not recently, so actually more than 3 years ago. I don't know the copies of the book available, but this is on the screen. And before I give you just a quick rundown about the book, it could start with the title of the book, because anyone who published at least one book knows that the publisher is always reluctant to accept your first, second, third, even 10th offer. So it's a long, endless negotiation. And it's the first time in my life that when I came up with an idea, and as you can see, it's not very original, winter's coming. So it's clear reference to the Game of Thrones and the books of George Martin, the Song of Ice and Fire. They asked me why, and I said, look, I believe that the title could actually reflect the whole idea of the book. The idea one is that history is not linear, but it goes in cycles. And since the idea of the book was to describe the very quick rise and fall of Russian democracy and the reaction of the free world and the euphoria of 91, 92 at the end of the Cold War, and the outcome in 2015, it was already clear to me that Putin would be an existential threat. Actually, he was an existential threat to the free world. So the idea was to say winter is coming because we thought the democracy has won. And the most popular book, if you remember, in 1992, or one of the best-selling books was The End of History by Francis Fukuyama. And I have to say that I share the same attitude. Yes, it's over. So it's this. I think someone could make tons of money in 1991 betting that 9 years after the collapse of communism and the Soviet Union, KGB Lieutenant Colonel would be Russian president. It was inconceivable, but it did happen, and I tried to explain in the book why. And I thought the title would be a good reflection of that, because winter is coming. And also, the idea of the original motto of House of Stark in George Martin's book was to warn that this winter is not just climate change. It depends very much on human reaction. Are we ready for that? Can we get prepared? Or it can catch us by surprise. And again, I thought it would be just a good reflection. They spent about 30 minutes listening to me and my associate and friend, Mick Gringert, who has been writing with me all these books. And they said, yes, okay, fine. But they said, we are not sure about your subtitle. Why Vladimir Putin and the enemies of the free world must be stopped. Because the moment you say the enemies of the free world, it could remind people about the Cold War. I said, absolutely, because winter is coming. So they spent another 15 minutes arguing, but they actually accepted the subtitle as well. So now the book had 3 elements. It's a personal story of a Soviet chess champion who joined at a very early age pro-democracy movement at the end of the 80s, and my relations with Soviet Union was rules of the Soviet Union under Gorbachev, then with Yeltsin's regime and rise of Putin, and why in 2005 I made the decision to leave professional chess and to start what many people mistakenly called Russian politics. I always correct them, saying it's not about politics, it's more about human rights and democracy. Because the moment you say, Garry Kasparov joined political movement, he's trying to challenge Putin, he's running for president, people get a very wrong picture. Because they think, he's running a campaign. He can go on television to have debates. By the way, Vladimir Putin never had a single debate in his life. That's it. The only debates in Russia that are allowed in Russia is our debate on the streets with Putin's riot police. But then, as you can guess, it's always one-sided. And then, you can do all other things, that promote your views. You can just participate in the elections. Absolutely not. It's in Putin's Russia, even more than 10 years ago, at the time which I called vegetarian time. Because at that time, for protesting against Putin politics on the streets, you can get 5 or 10 days in jail. That I did a few times. Today, it will be 5 or 10 years. So, if you survive, of course. So, and when people asked me in 2005 and 2006 whether, I could feel that my chess experience could help me to navigate in this very muddy waters of Putin's Russian political life? I said absolutely not. Because in chess, we have fixed rules and unpredictable results. In Putin's Russia, it's exactly the opposite. So rules change all the time, but result stays the same. Yeah. And also then I tried to explain the best I could the reasons for this very short rise of democracy in Russia, and try to bust some mythology about Yeltsin's years and why Putin's rise somehow was inevitable, and that obviously was the end of Russian democracy. Now, some people say it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback in 2015, telling about what's happened in 2001. I mean, just to, for the record, my first article warning about Vladimir Putin being a threat not only to Russia but to the rest of the world was dated all the way back to January 2001, with editorial in the Wall Street Journal. And since that, I had plenty of articles, plenty of warnings, and unfortunately for 15 years, it was literally shouting in the desert. Now we're also in the desert, but people are listening. And of course, but the key element of the book, and that's why I wanted to write it in 2015 and to be released in 2015, it was about Western reaction. Of course, euphoria in 91, 92, and then, oh, look, embrace Russia, hug, and keep closing eyes to what was already, there was already indications about a potential change and return to the dark ages. But nobody wanted to hear that. And in 1999, in the year that says Putin was nominated and then eventually promoted to be first acting president, and then he was elected, quote unquote, in year 2000. Many in the West still, wanted to, not to close their eyes, but they wanted to pretend that Vladimir Putin, or succession of KGB officer after it's following Yeltsin, it was just, a normal process. Now, I didn't even, they asked me, have you ever met Vladimir Putin? I said, no. But I met enough KGB colonels to know who he was. And even without meeting Putin, all you needed is just to listen what he said, quote unquote. The collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, Vladimir Putin. Speaking, still being a prime minister, speaking to his former colleagues at the Lubyanka Square, it's KGB headquarters in Moscow. There were no former KGB officers. Once KGB, always KGB, quote unquote. And his first action, restoring Soviet anthem as a president of Russia. Now you say, oh, anthem, big deal. It's symbolic. Absolutely, it is symbolic. If you simply look at these two quotes, very popular quotes, and his first act as a president of Russia, you could understand what he was able or where he would go if given the chance. So the problem is that the free world didn't want to see that. And I have to say that he played his card very well. So it's KGB school. We should give him credit for recognizing that at first he needed friends. So he had to pretend that he was a democratic leader because it helped him in Russia. It was virtually impossible for people like me or my great friend, late Boris Nemtsov, the man who was murdered in 2015. At one point, people believed he could be Yeltsin's successor when he was the first deputy prime minister in 1997. So when we were trying to warn the free world about Putin's threat, it's just, again, we received it was very cold reception. But in Russia, it was even worse, because no matter how loud could be my voice, and I was quite recognizable in Russia. So it's Garry Kasparov or a few other good, decent people saying Putin is bad. But at the same time, you have a picture on television with Vladimir Putin being a host of they call it G8 meeting. I always call it G7+1, because G7 stood for 7 great industrial democracies, and Russia was not a democracy, and as for industrialization, we could also argue about it. But Putin was a host, And he had Bush 43, he had Schroeder, then Angela Merkel, Chirac, and Sarkozy. So all, the Berlusconi, of course. So people could see Putin hosting the meeting of the leaders of the free world. So should they believe Garry Kasparov, Boris Nemtsov, and a few other, rogue intellectuals, or they should believe their eyes? When Putin had a literally stamp of approval from the free world of being a democratic leader. But of course, it didn't last forever. So eventually Putin consolidated enough power and, started his campaign of not rebuilding Russia, but creating the foundation for his personal power. So basically moving Russia from a soft authoritarian state to a one-man dictatorship. And by the way, as many dictators in the past, Vladimir Putin was sometimes very frank with his intentions. His speech in 2007 in Munich, at Munich Security Conference, was a clear warning that his intention was to rebuild what he called the sphere of Soviet influence. Again, the free world ignored these warnings. It reminded me the same reaction of the free world in the 1930s, where, by the way, Hitler was never hiding his intentions, but still, everybody pretended that it was just for domestic consumption. We can ignore it because, of course, he would not do that. And one of the arguments that made me always so angry, I said, oh, didn't Putin understand how bad he would look? He doesn't give a damn. It's just, dictators never ask why. They always ask why not. And if you give them just, one piece, he'll look for another one. It's negotiating with someone who eventually makes crisis as his policy, most successful policy. It's futile. And the book was written in 2015 after Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And I submitted, actually, they submitted the proposal in, it was late January, actually, late January. And I discussed the schedule, and said I would like the book to be released in October. They said October 2016 is probably a little bit too far. I said, no, October 2015. Said, it's too early. I said, in 3 months you can have the book. But I said, no, but it's a small publishing house, public affairs, so we didn't have a budget to promote the book. So we have to think. I said, don't worry. Don't worry about the book promotion. As long as Putin is in Kremlin, front page of the newspaper is guaranteed. Because Putin will do everything to make sure that this book, will not be, the content of the book will not be out of use. Then the book was released, and my hope was that presidential campaign of 2015-2016 could actually lead to a serious discussion about US foreign policy. Okay, I was wrong. It was not serious at all. And one of the ideas of the book is that the rise of Vladimir Putin and also the rise of other forces of democracy around the world was connected to the fact that the United States foreign policy was no longer consistent as it used to be during the Cold War. And this is something that people here in this country could not feel. And yesterday, following the discussion on stage, with great historians and experts discussed different American presidents, I thought that maybe I should share with you the way we saw the United States and US presidents from the other side of the Iron Curtain. Again, I understand it's very subjective, but for those of us who live there, not all of us, but people who shared my beliefs in freedom, in democracy, and in other things that I believe are vitally important for any normal civilized society. So we looked at America as not just a beacon of hope or shining city on a hill, but it's also just a country that could help us just to move forward and to get rid of this unhuman communist system. And judging from this criteria, for me and millions like me, two best US presidents from the Cold War, during the Cold War were Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan. For simple reasons, Harry Truman stopped communist expansion and Reagan eventually defeated it. So, but then I just analyzed, again, not trying to diminish others, it's just the way we saw it. And it's, also, it's what was important, I think it's just to understand that since Harry Truman built his administration, built all these key institutions like National Security Council, CIA, NATO, so Marshall Plan for Europe, Voice of America as a counter-propaganda vehicle against Soviet propaganda machine. So there were several administrations, both Democratic and Republicans, but they all had element of consistency. The rest of the world knew that America was there. And yeah, you could see some retreats under Eisenhower, some more, aggressive policies with other presidents, but at the end of the day, you could rely on the United States. So what's happened after 1991? Instead of being consistent, it worked more like a pendulum. So Clinton did little, Bush 43 did too much, Obama did nothing. So and the reaction of the world was, wait a second, it's not the same America we used to know. It's a country which foreign policy depends entirely on the man in the White House. Could be a woman, but this on the person who is actually sitting at the desk. And that was bad news for American friends and allies, and great news for Putin and the like. Because it's the moment that's the foreign policy is no longer consistent and is based on certain values. So it's the free world loses its greatest advantage, being strategic. Dictators cannot be strategic. Now it's chess players is talking. They're tactical. They're very good in coming up with an immediate response, because they don't care about public approval, about Congress, about Senate, about free press. Instantly, they can immediately react. So just they can push the table, they can send troops, they can transfer the money. But strategically, they are doomed because it all depends on one person or a group that is running the country. It's the dictatorship. They don't care what happens after they've gone. Democracy could rely on strategy. That's why something started by Democratic president, say Harry Truman, could actually continue with other administrations, and eventually Republican president, Ronald Reagan, has delivered the deadly blow to communist system. Since 1992, it's also it's short-term policy based on immediate interests of those who are in power, and of course it greatly benefits those on the other side of this called geopolitical aisle. And also the book reflected, I think, that's the belief of the free world that, at the end of the Cold War, there were no more existential enemies. Look, Soviet Union was a real enemy. I'm sure many of you remember that. And yeah, and it started probably from the classroom where you could learn about it. So now, when Soviet Union has gone, there were no enemies because. True, America in 1992 was by far the most powerful country, probably in the history of human race, militarily and economically, and it was a political model everybody wanted to follow. But in this new type of hybrid conflicts and wars of the 21st century, it's not just about your military might, your economic power, or your political prowess. It's about political will. Do you have will to fight? And I hear all the time that, why should we confront Putin? He's so dangerous. It's so, it's counterproductive. So we should always find a way to compromise. And I agree, the language of deterrence is very rough. Language of appeasement is nice. The problem is that if you try to delay response to an aggression, the price goes up every day. I think we learned it from the 1930s. And for those who say, it's so dangerous to confront Putin today. My question is Putin more dangerous today than Joseph Stalin in 1948, where Harry Truman saved West Berlin by ordering airlifting campaign that lasted 11 months? Is Putin more aggressive than Soviet Union under Khrushchev in 1962? Is Soviet Union today? Soviet Union was less dangerous and less powerful in early 1980s when Ronald Reagan called it evil empire. So it's all about, it's the conflict, it's about two sides. And Russia today, naturally, is a pale shadow of the Soviet Union economically and militarily. But it has a leadership, more likely it's like a mafia state, that is better adjusted to the realities of the outside world. And Vladimir Putin, as a KGB expert, KGB operative, he realized that instead of trying sort of direct approach, there are many other ways. He's famous for being an amateur judo fighter. And in judo, you have to use the strengths of your opponent to your advantage. So he came up with this concept of hybrid wars that I explained briefly in the book, because we saw already him building the industry of fake news and troll factories in Russia in 2004, 2005, 2006. They actually realized that instead of trying to sell you an ideology as the communists tried throughout the Cold War, you could have something far more effective. You can spread doubts. I always call Putin merchant of doubt. And it's very effective. Yeah, maybe we're bad. Everybody's bad. Russia is not democracy. Who cares? There's no democracy in the world. You cannot know the truth because truth is relative. And by the way, there's only one way to tell the truth and many ways to lie. By the way, thanks to the devices invented in the free world. And the Putin's latest operation of the smear campaign, of the fake news industry, it's a brilliant demonstration how you can use technology invented in the free world to undermine the very foundation of the free world. Again, brilliant campaign, and by the way, not so expensive. You don't have to spend tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's far more effective because it divides free society from within. You will not find word Syria in the book because there was no Syria at the time. There's no name Donald Trump in the book. But between lines you read, it's not if Vladimir Putin attacks next year, it's when and where. And I've been warning that it's this, what he did in Russia by creating this fake news industry and simply paralyzing people because you have one message, like a Pravda newspaper, or 9 o'clock news, Soviet Union, one channel. A lot of people are saying, it's not, we don't trust it. We want to hear Voice of America or Radio Liberty. The other side is, you have many websites and they contain 90% of true information. But the message is divided, 10% here, 5% there. So it's like a poison that is spread around. But it's far more effective. Because a lot of people could see that maybe it's not exactly what, what I like, but there's something there. So, and it's spreading doubts easy and spreading chaos. It serves Putin extremely well because he just recognized that instead of having direct attack on free world, you can use political, financial, and social infrastructure of the free world to his own advantage. Corruption, now it's widespread. It's a theory that sounds well as a language of appeasement, that if you improve trade relations, if you improve social exchange with dictatorial regimes, they could become civilized. It has never worked. Just, it's show me once in history where this policy, good intentions, wishful thinking, it has never worked. So trying to create this interactive way of exchanging with Russia, thinking, if we come in with, we'll embrace Putin and Russian oligarchs and we'll invest in Russia. They can bring their money to the free world. So it will create an exchange and Russia will eventually become civilized and will play by the rules. It's exactly the opposite. It's not that Putin adopted the rules of the free world. It's the free world, at many instances, adopted Putin's corruption. Again, I'm not trying to say it's not a hypothetical discussion. There are results. Now, in 2015, unfortunately, so when I talked about these things, the reaction was mixed. While the book was well received here and in Europe, so the Wall Street Journal had a review, The Economist, very good reviews. 2 newspapers, you can guess, they had negative reviews. New York Times, Washington Post. Now, again, you can have any reviews. Yeah, so it's a free world. But it's what's important, what was written there. Now, New York Times subscribed, just for the review, person who actually has hated me since 1990 because he has been supported Serge Schmemann. So he has been supporting Gorbachev while supporting Yeltsin. And also he was a Putin apologist. Now, the whole idea of the review was, the book was nothing else but Obama bashing. Was it Obama bashing? Yes. Was it Bush bashing? Yes. Was it Clinton bashing? Yes. The whole book is about American foreign policy since 1991. And I didn't care whether it was president or Republican or Democrat. I looked at their deeds, at their words. And by the way, what I discovered, it's quite amazing. All of them, since they left office, they knew what was right. You just keep quoting, whether it's Bill Clinton, Colin Powell, Bush 41, Bush 43, so it's all of them. So in the books, they're telling you exactly, they knew how bad Putin was. Excuse me, but you were in the office. Yeah, so it's, how come? So trying to reduce it to Obama, because Obama was in the office at the time. So I think it was definitely unfair. So Washington Post, had a former CNN correspondent in Moscow, Jill Doherty, to write the story. And it was very dismissive because she said, look, Garry Kasparov on Yahoo said, Vladimir Putin was more dangerous than ISIS. That's it. It disqualified me. In 2018, General Mattis and two top British commanders, intelligence and Joint Chief of Staff, all said that Vladimir Putin is far more dangerous than all Islamic radicals. But in 2015, I looked like a joke. So that was enough to even discredit the whole book and the whole idea. Again, I said ISIS, Schmeisis, al-Qaeda, they come and go, but KGB stays. And I already in 2015 was warning that American political system could be too vulnerable for this intervention. I said at Facebook that the whole idea, the business model of Facebook and Twitter, I call it, it was like a beehive for a Russian bear. It was so obvious that they could use it because they already had these mechanisms used in Russia in so-called near abroad, former Soviet republics with a chunk of Russian-speaking population. They moved to Eastern Europe, and they have been successful doing it in Western Europe. Vladimir Putin had one of the best records in influencing elections. I remember when pro-Putin parties won elections in Italy, Cinque Stelle and Lega Nord, I said it's the first free and fair elections Vladimir Putin won. So what could stop him from doing the same thing in the United States? I thought it would be natural just for him to try at least. And he did. And he succeeded. So, I thought that the book, would have more traction. But again, the debate that I expected, unfortunately, didn't take place. So, so by having said that, I think I could invite my good friend Brett Stevens to the stage, and we can just continue this conversation because he always shared my views and beliefs, and we can now move into the dialogue stage. It's a problem when you talk about this. It's about the impact of Putin's activities, or this clandestine activities for the United States. So it's amazing that it could work even in this country. So this is with 2 years of Trump's presidency, and the majority of the Reagan's party trust Putin more than FBI.
As I was listening to your talk, Garry, one of the things I found striking as a metaphor was Putin's mastery of judo and the ability to use an enemy's strengths in order to defeat him. So let's start looking forward and being more positive, since presumably winter will be followed by spring. How does the West use the tools of judo against Putin? What are his Achilles heels? I think I'm mixing metaphors there. And how do we begin to organize a strategy that can defeat him as effectively as Reagan was able to defeat the Soviet Union back in the 1980s?
Okay, the key word in what you said is strategy. And you can design your strategy when you recognize that there's a threat. If you don't recognize you are at war, there's no strategy. And it's the problem with the denial. So since Putin's invasion of Ukraine, European Union also followed the United States, imposed sanctions, but Germany has doubled the amount of Russian gas it has been buying. So from Putin's perspective, so what's the big deal? So Europe is still demanding how much gas and how much oil they have to buy from Russia, basically supplying Putin with the cash that he has been wisely investing in propaganda campaign to undermine European democracy and European Union itself. They're still talking about spending 1 or 2 million euros, some of extreme views, maybe 4 million euros to counter Putin's propaganda campaign. He spends billions. So first it's a recognition of the fact that we are at war, and Vladimir Putin is an existential threat because he made his campaign defying the United States, defying free world, and fighting for the spheres of influence around the world, core element of his domestic propaganda. He has nothing else to show. You look at his achievements in Russia, things are getting worse and worse. Economy is in tatters. You look at his latest actions of his government. They're trying to scratch any money, denying pensions for retired people. So it's everything, the housing, social security, healthcare, everything is falling apart. So it's being replaced by 24/7 anti-American propaganda. So that's why Putin will continue. There's no other way for him to justify his endless stay in power. So all attempts that you can find a way to appease him, no, it's not going to work. Because the moment he stops doing that, he will have no more reasons to convince Russian public that he should stay in Kremlin.
And when you say an existential threat, just to be clear, I think I'm speaking for you. I mean, if you're, say, a Latvia or an Estonia, there is a real existential threat. But if you are an Italy, a Germany, or even in the United States, the existential threat is that Putin is supporting parties and candidates on either side of the political divide that represent the very fringes, the far right when it suits his purposes, as well as the far left, because that sows doubts and divisions within the framework of liberal democracy.
Absolutely. So, and that makes Putin far more dangerous than the communist propaganda, because he is not limited by supporting the so-called peace movements, far left, communist groups. He can go either way. He's quite happy with Le Pen in France or Mélenchon on the far left. He is very happy with Die Linke in Germany, former communist, or with AfD, the party of his entire creation. So, and look at the UK, he's quite happy with the Brexiteers or with Corbyn. So and we can go to other countries. Italy, for instance, you have Cinque Stelle, the left-wing populist, or Lega Nord. So Vladimir Putin goes with anything that helps to destroy the normality. So it's anything that helps him to decimate political center. That always had a gravity just to keep free world political system together.
Let's keep the focus on how we can start thinking about defeating Putin, because he does have Achilles heels. He has billions of dollars in ill-gotten wealth, which is distributed through
we should talk about hundreds of billions. Some say probably over $1 trillion when you look at the combined wealth of Russian oligarchs spread around the world. I mean, it's insane amount of money that he controls.
And that money is controlled through oligarchs who have homes in London, in
everywhere.
Switzerland, in the United States as well. So, for instance, let's just take one oligarch in particular, Oleg Deripaska. There's been some questions about his future with the United States. Talk to us about how going after Deripaska can help us go after Putin.
Look, it's Vladimir Putin political system is, as I said already, it's more like a mafia structure. So, and Putin knows how to keep this balance. So that's why it's not about ideology, but it's about making sure that all the groups that create this mafia circle, they are satisfied. I mean, typical example of how the system works is Russian policy towards Iran or Saudi Arabia. Because many Western political pundits, they were surprised to see that Russia has been supporting Iran and had very strong military contacts with Iran, with their allies. And at the same time, Russia has been siding with Saudi Arabia, basically, just it's helping to kick Iran out of the oil market. There's no contradiction, just two different groups. The Minister of Defense and the military contractors, they want to work with Iran. But at the same time, Putin gives the green light to Russian oligarchs and the oil industry to have their fair cut. So he's kind of spine of the system. He has to balance it. And as long as he can be seen as someone who protects the interests of oligarchs abroad, he could still not command, but he could actually have certain contacts that will help them to be off the hook. So it's very difficult to convince oligarchs or any political force in Russia to go after Vladimir Putin. And Deripaska was an important example. He was already underwater, and all of a sudden, he's just, he's back in business. So I'm still, confused how 42 Republican senators could vote to leave the sanctions. 42.
So to crack Putin's spine, you have to convince a critical mass of people in the verticals of power that their interests are not well served with him continuing as president.
It's going back to what I said about the Soviet anthem. It's about symbols and the way these political systems, they function. It's image of invincibility. Yeah. As long as dictator looks invincible, he's invincible. It doesn't matter whether he's invincible or not in real life. It's about perception. So going back to World War II, the only serious attempt against Hitler was made in July 1944 after D-Day, after German generals recognized the war was over. Now, before they were just they were not happy, but still, it's just they had to recognize that the game was over, and then they try.
But they should have placed the bomb on the other side.
Okay,
of the
but
table.
that's not. Look, it's just yes, we know that. No, but so it's going back to the Soviet Union. Is that I remember in 1989. I think many of you also remember these pictures that the Soviet tanks have been leaving Afghanistan. February 15, the Soviet army led by General Gromov left Afghanistan, crossed the bridge, came back. So it's unlike American stampede from Saigon. It's it was well organized, very in order. They could even keep pro-Soviet Najibullah regime for nearly 3 years in Kabul. But the image of empire being on retreat, it was so powerful. By the end of this year, 1989, Soviet empire collapsed in Eastern Europe, and in less than 3 years, Soviet Union ceased to exist. It's about psychological image that empire is getting weaker, dictator is no longer invincible, and Putin is a master of creating this image that he's in charge. It's one of his best, show was in 2015. I think 2015, when he all of a sudden he jumped in the plane, he went to the General Assembly of United Nations in New York. And I remember I got a call from Wall Street Journal asking to write an editorial about it because it's all of a sudden, it was I think Wednesday. I said, I could give you an article on Friday. They said, all right, but he will be speaking on Monday. I said, but I didn't have to hear what he's going to say. I know exactly what's going to happen. So they asked me just to put an article just for the later date. And the whole idea was not to speak, was not even to show up there. It's all for one picture. Maybe some of you probably should remember that, meeting Obama. They met at the United Nations, and if you remember, Obama was reaching out, and Putin spent a couple of seconds hesitating. I bet you he spent hours in front of the mirror, rehearsing it, because it's so important. The way it's being read in Russia, had no choice. United Nations, New York, to pay respect. He went to the belly of the beast. He had to meet Obama. He didn't want to shake his hand. He did. Next day, Russian planes bombed American-backed rebels in Syria. Now, that's the message. That's the way he operates. So phenomenal effect of just, of just minor opportunity, as it's in, as many people saw it in the United States.
One thing that I should mention is that Garry and I are partners in something called the Renew Democracy Initiative. And we're going to be talking about it a bit more
tomorrow. Yes.
Tomorrow with Anne Applebaum. It's a collection of leading lights, both on the center right and the center left of the political spectrum, not only in the United States, but also in Europe, throughout the world, Latin America as well. Because, as you mentioned, Putin's method isn't so much to sell a new form of communism to the West, it is to sow doubts. So if you're going to counter the sowing of doubts, we have to remind ourselves, and especially I think we have to remind young people at top universities in America today, why liberal democracy is precious, why it's fragile, and why it's under threat. And so that's what you and I are doing together.
That's about existential threat, because they understand that they have to destroy the image of democracy and free society as necessary elements of future progress. So again, it's maybe all bad, all good, it doesn't matter. So it's moral equivalence that they're spreading out. And unfortunately, there are so many people here that just don't see any difference. Oh, big deal, so China is rising, so what's the difference? And I think it's teaching people what's happened during the Cold War and also before that, and asking them to look at the results. It's just, I keep having these debates on my social media about socialism. Now with this disaster in Venezuela, so people keep talking about socialism, and so it's not that bad. Look at Scandinavian countries. And I'm telling you, it's not about Scandinavian countries. It's not about welfare state, it's about central planning. So just, it's amazing how this little thematic differences, could throw people away just from just normal, those main historical
I was thinking when, shortly after he took office, President Trump had an interview with Bill O'Reilly, and O'Reilly said to him, well, Mr. President, but Vladimir Putin is a killer. And to which the president replied, this was on television, he said, well, you don't think we have our killers too? So how do you counter that kind of relativism going forward?
Look, it's the relativism. Unfortunately, it's not only Trump. So I remember when I visited President Truman's library in Missouri, in Independence, Missouri. So it was a shocking moment when I just realized that in the presidential library, the beginning of the Cold War actually had this, there are two angles to cover it. They also had Stalin's view of potential threat from unified Germany as a good excuse for Soviet Union taking over half of Europe. So I think there's this moral relativism and the moral equivalence. They were quite popular even before Trump. But of course, he pushed it to just totally new level. And a few days ago, I was at a conference in Switzerland. It was an AI, artificial intelligence conference. And it was a dinner, and there was one of the top Google executives there in the room. And we had an argument because, this is, as you know, more than 3,000 Google engineers signed a petition against working with Pentagon on autonomous weapons system called Maven. At the same time, Google sees nothing wrong in working with Chinese government developing Dragonfly. It's a system that could help Chinese authorities to spy on individuals. Basically, it will connect your social media account with your private phone. And it's amazing that it's even at this conversation, private conversation, it was, but it's engineering solution. So I think it's important to understand that it's in these conflicts, it's not, that both sides are wrong. It's like when you look at the, two Koreas. So the outcome was clear. So America was on one side, Soviet Union was on another side. And again, I want, especially young people, just to recognize that history should teach us something because we have results. Just look at these results. And
I don't mean to advertise another book while I'm here, but I urge you all to read Andrew Roberts' Biography of Churchill, particularly the chapter The Wilderness Years, because you'll learn that in the mid-1930s, people took about the view of Adolf Hitler as they did until quite recently of Vladimir Putin. And there was one outspoken voice in the wilderness in those years who was consistently warning of the danger posed by a new dictator coming out of Europe. And I would say that the voice who had been in the wilderness, no longer in the wilderness, thank God, for our time, is Garry Kasparov.
Thank you.